Okay. Before we start Lamed Hey, we're looking 11 lines up from the bottom of Lamed Dalet, Lamed Beis, and the introduction is based on the Gemara at the beginning of this chapter, which is on Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis. And the Gemara had two answers, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, to reconcile what seems to be a contradiction between a Mishnah here in Masechet Ketuvot Perek Gimel and a Mishnah in Masechet Makos. And the issue is whether or not what we call loke u'mishalim knas. Normally, when a person is chayav malchus, he doesn't have to pay any fees. We alleviate him of monetary payments. So, for example, the Mishnah has a case where a person burns down someone's haystack on Shabbos. Okay, but that's a case of chayve mitzvah. We're talking about chayve lavin, but the principle is the same, and he doesn't pay for damages on the wheat that went up in smoke of his friend because he's chayav a criminal corporeal punishment. The issue is about knas. When the Torah imposes a monetary penalty for your action, there's one svara to say that the penalty is on top of the corporeal punishment, because now they're both begeder onesh. The knas is an onesh, it's a punitive financial penalty, and the malchus is certainly a punishment. So the Mishnah seems to contradict itself from one Seder to another, from Seder Noshim to Seder Nezikin, on this issue about whether or not there's Malchus and Knas for the same action. Rabbi Yochanan, back on Daf Lamed Beis, reconciles it in the following way. Our Mishnah here in Masechet Ketuvot is talking about a case of someone who's not chayav malchus because he did it b'shogeg. There was no asra, so that's why he's chayav knas. Reish Lakish says, and this is on Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, that the Mishnah reflects the Shita Rabbi Meir, who holds that a person gets malchus and pays mammon, and how much more so does he get malchus and pay mammon, even though, and certainly if it's a knas. So Bishleim el Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara says that I can understand full well why Rabbi Yochanan rejects Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan lo amar kireish lakish. Rabbi Yochanan, who says that our Mishnah is talking about a case where he pays knas, and the reason why he doesn't get malchus is because he was a shogeg, there was no asra. Lo amar kireish lakish. He didn't want to interpret our Mishnah based on Rabbi Meir dam mokim le Rabbana. He tries to avoid wherever possible attributing a Mishnah to a dissenting view of a das yachid, but would rather be very healthy and attribute a Mishnah to the Chachamim, to the majority view. Whereas Reish Lakish is saying that no, the Mishnah reflects the Shita of Rabbi Meir and Loka Mishalim. Ela Reish Lakish, my time alone, Rabbi Yochanan. Why not accept Rabbi Yochanan's ukimta that the Mishnah is talking about a case where he didn't get asra? And if he didn't get asra, he's a shogeg. That's why he doesn't get malchus. And the Gemara says, "Vi azdu litamayu." We have here a case of a machlokes in which Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are consistent with their views in another issue, which is very closely related to our issue. If he asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Omar, he declared chayve misas shogigin, v'chayve malchus shogigin. the principle of Kim Leba the Rabimina, that you only get one punishment, applies even in a case of a shogeg, which means that if he violated an Avera without a Hasra, so we assume him to be a shogeg, or let's say not Chavi Misos, but Chavi Malkios, and he was a shogeg, is in those cases for the Maisa Avera, there's no Chiyuv Misa, there's no Chiyuv Malkus, because he was a shogeg. But Davar Ache, okay, Rabbi Dimi says that there is a Chiyuv Mamon. Davar Ache means that although he's alleviated from Malkus insofar as he's a shogeg, but he does pay Davar Ache, which is obviously a Chiyuv Mamon. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Chayev. Rabbi Yochanan says that since there's no Malkus or Misa in these cases of Shogegin, they can't knock off the Chiyuv Mamon, and therefore he's Chayev to pay Tashlumei Mamon. And to our surprise, Reish Lakish says you're part of it. You don't have to pay the Mamon, even though you're not going to get Malkus nor Misa. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayev to Holo Asrube. This is a case where he didn't get Asra, and he's not Chayev an Onesh without a Hasra, he's a Shogeg. And therefore, he's going to only be Chayev for one Onesh, and that's going to be Mamon. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, once you knock off the Chiyuv Misa or Malkus, there's nothing to apply Kim Leib and Rabina as far as the Chiyuv Mamon is concerned. Why? Avon de ilu asrube potter. Shlokish is looking at the theoretical rather than the practical or the actual. And therefore, had there been a Hasra, he would not pay Mamon. We would apply the principle of Kim Leib Derami, and it would give Malkus or Misa. So Kilo Asr Nami, even in a case where there was no Asra, so there won't be any Malkus or Misa, Potter, he's still Potter. He doesn't have to pay for the Mamon. So again, Rabbi Yochanan is putting the emphasis on what I call before, what's going on in actuality. Is he getting the more severe punishment? Is he condemned to death or for Malkus? If he's not, then let him pay the Mamon. Whereas according to Reish Lakish, all right, you have a technical issue that he's not going to be punished, neither Misa nor Malkus, because there was no Asra, but we look at the Avera itself. And the Avera itself is a Chiyuv Misa or a Chiyuv Malkus. And that Chiyuv will generate Kim Lebed Rabbi. So it's an amazing thing. According to Reish Lakish, he's potter from Tashlumei Mamon, even though we're not going to punish him, neither for Misa nor for Malkus, but simply because if there would have been Asra, this Maisa would have generated a chiyuv, whether it be Malkus or Misa. Therefore, even in the absence of Asra, where there will not be Misa or Malkus, nevertheless he's part of the Tashlum. Now, in order to understand Reish Lakish's objection to Rabbi Yochanan, which is going to be based on a drush in the Parashat Mishpatim, we're going to offer a little bit of an introduction. If we open up to Parshas Mishpatim, the Torah says, "V'chiyinatzu anoshim." So there's a feud, a boxing match between two men.
So why you finish what you had to do?
Oh yes, okay. So I would just give me a minute. I'll just give a little of. Okay, so in this pasuk again, let's go over this. There are two men fighting, and one of them bangs into a pregnant woman, and she loses her. If the pasuk says yiladeha, might mean that she had twins, whatever it might be. Then the pasuk says v'lo yeh ason anoshi anesh, which means that she, the mother, survived, and the Vlados did not. Let's use the singular for just to make. And the Vlad did not survive. Anoshi Anesh, right? The one who hit her will be punished. Asher yashisala bala isha v'nasan beplilin, which means that he's chayiv to pay tashlumei nezikin because the mother survived. Now, the Gemara is going to clarify that there are two ways of interpreting this pasuk, lo yeh ason. One is, as we interpret it, referring to the woman, the mother. So she survived. And therefore, he, the boxer, we'll call him, the mazik, he has to pay dmei vlodos. The other way of interpreting it is that when it says v'lo yeh ason, it's referring to the nogef. The nogef is the boxer, right? He's the mazik, the nogef. And what does that mean, lo yeh ason? It means that he's not chayiv misa. Now, so far, it's identical, because in both cases, he's not chayiv misa. The first case, the first interpretation, he's not chayiv misa because she survived, so he was not a murderer. In the second interpretation, he survived because he survived. What's the difference between these two interpretations? Let's say the Nogev actually killed this woman, but without a hasra. According to the first pshat, it's irrelevant whether it was hasra or not, because he's only chayav dmei v'lados because lo mesa isha. That's called lo yeh ason, but here she died. So in this case, he's parted from dmei v'lados because she died. According to the second interpretation, that the pasuk is referring lo yeh ason to the nogef himself, then it's only because he's not chayav misa. And in such a case that he's not chayav misa, he has to pay dmei v'lados. And if the woman died, and the nogef is not slapped with what we call a din misa, like for example, there was no asra, then he's chayav in dmei v'lados. Whereas according to the first interpretation, even in the absence of asra, since she died, he's parted from dmei v'lados. And the Gemara is going to try to interpret that the machlokas Rabbi Yochanan Shlokish that we saw until now about whether Kimlei Ramene applies to the theoretical or to the actual will generate this machlokas about how to interpret lo yeh ason. Esvei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish raises the following objection to Rabbi Yochanan. It says in the pasuk again, "V'chinotzu anoshim minol kuishar v'yatzil develo yeh ason anoshi anesh." Now we turn to Daf Lamed Hey. My love, ason mamish, meaning that she didn't die. and therefore the nogeif is chayiv to pay dmei v'lados. And the implication is that dmei v'lados are paid when there was no ason at all. She didn't die at all. But if she died, then the nogeif is potter from dmei v'lados, even though there was no asra. And this is going to be the case of the concept of Reish Lakish, that chayve mises shogigin are pturim mitashlumin. Because it all depends upon whether she dies or not. And Rabbi Yochanan says, "Lo, that's not how I'm going to interpret the pasuk. The Torah is not referring to a son of the isha, but rather din a son. In other words, the issue is what's the status of the nogev? Did the nogev have asra and therefore be chayv misa, or did he not have asra? Ika di Amri. Now we have a second Lishna. It wasn't Reish Lakish who asked this kasha against Rabbi Yochanan, but rather just the opposite. Eitzvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. V'lo yeh son anoshi anesh. My love, shouldn't we assume that what the Torah has in mind is that if we did not implement regarding the nogev a din ason, meaning an actual condemnment as a for capital punishment, so therefore the nogev is not chayiv misa, then he's chayiv mei v'lados. So even if the woman died, but there was no asra, then that would be chayiv misa shogigin, and he would have to pay tashlumin. And that's against Reish Lakish, who says the chayiv misa shogigin poter mitashlumin. And the Gemara answers, or Reish Lakish himself answers, lo, this is not what the Torah has in mind. The Torah is talking about lo yeh ason mamish, which means that the woman did not die. And if she didn't die, then the nogev is chayiv to pay dmei v'lados. If she died, even if there's no asra on the nogev, and the nogev is not chayiv to pay, right? And he's not chayiv any punishment. Nevertheless, he is not chayiv for dmei v'lados. We alleviate him from dmei v'lados according to Reish Lakish because of the theoretical halach of chayiv mitzvah shogigin p'tur mitashlum. Omar Ravu mi kamanti Omar chayiv mitzvah shogigin chayiv b'tashlumin. Is it possible that there is such a shita that even though he's not chayiv misa because he was a shogeg and there was no asra, I'm sorry, I said even though. Scratch out the words even though. Is there such a shita that since because he's not chayiv misa, he's a shogeg, he's chayiv, he's still nevertheless chayiv in tashlum, even though that maisa that he did was a maisa of beira, which theoretically would have been a chayiv in misa's bezin, but he was a shogeg. And now we're going to say he's chayiv b'tashlumin. Ve'hatana debei chizkiya. And for some reason, the Gemara assumes that Tana debei chizkiya is a drasha that was accepted unanimously. No one questioned it. We have a hekesh between someone who kills a man and someone who kills an animal or injures an animal. And where's this hekesh? In Vayikra Chavdal, it says, "Umakei be'ema yishalmena, umakei adam yumas." And the implication is that makeh adam is poter mitashlumin, because yishalmenu only appears in the case of makeh behema. But we have a hekesh between makeh adam and makeh behema. And what do we derive from this case? Ma makabehema lo chilakta bo bein v'shogeg bein v'mezid. With regard to Nezikin, that's called makabehema. He's chayav b'tashlum Nezikin, whether or not he actually hit the animal, b'shogeg, or bein v'mezid, whether he hit the animal and killed the animal b'mezid. Bein v'miskaven, lebein she'ena miskaven. With regard to Tashlumin and Zikin of Adam Amasik, we don't differentiate between Kavana Lahasik or Eno Miskavin Lahasik. Furthermore, we're not going to make any difference between Bein Derech Yerida, the Bein Derech Aliyah. The photo mamon, El Lechayvo mamon. Just like in Maka Behema, he's chayav tashlumin, whether or not it was a shogeg, whether or not it was a mezid, whether or not he did it with kavana or without kavana. Whether it was derech yurida, when he put his hand down, like with an axe, or derech aliyah, when he lifted up his hands from down to up. And in all these cases, lo chilaktabo lefotro momo. In other words, we're not going to make this distinction and say, oh, he's only chayav b'mezid, but he's not chayav b'shogeg. But we're not going to pater him up, even though the hakol was b'shogeg. You're right, El Chayvamon. Oh, now comes the hekesh. Af make adam, a person who kills another human being, is chayav misa and he's potter from tashlumin. Is lo techalik bo bein shogig bein mezid bein skavim l'shenim skavim derech yiridim derech aliyah l'chayv moment el lefotzom. That in all these cases, we're not going to be machalik, and we're going to say he's potter. So we don't differentiate to be mechayev in mamon when he was makeh adam, whether it be b'shogeg or shlom b'skavein, derech yirida. In any case, he is going to be potter from tashlumin. In any event, one thing we see explicitly that chayv misa shogeg him up to him michiv tashlumin. Right? It says bein b'shogeg bein b'mezid l'foto mama. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say against this brisa that you only pay in a case of mezid, not in a case of shogeg? So this brisa that we're quoting, that Rav is quoting, would seem to be an explicit support for Reish Lakish. It all depends on the theoretical Maisa Machayev, not the Chiyuv before. He's part of him Tashlumin, even though there won't be any Chiyuv Malchus or Misa. Also, Ravin, when Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Omar Machlokit or Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, it's not the way Rav Dimi had transmitted it, but rather Bechayve Misas Shogigin. Kuliyama lo pli the Pturim. So we're going back to the theoretical construct of Reish Lakish, but now Rabbi Yochanan is on board and he agrees with Reish Lakish that since there was a potential chiyuv misa, therefore he's part of him tashlumin. So ki pligi, where's the machlok between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish now? B'chayvei malchus shogig v'davar acher. A person who simultaneously incurred a chiyuv malchus b'shogeg and a chiyuv mamon. Rabbi Yochanan Amar chayav. He has to pay tashlumei mamon. He's not part of midin kimlim ramine because chayvei misas iskish, but chayvei malchus lo iskish. The hekish here is to makeh odom, to makeh be'ema, but not to chayvei malchus. Therefore, we're not going to derive from here that even in the case of chayvei malchus, when he's a shogeg, he's going to be part of a tashlumei mamon, which he was mischayev at the time of the Ma'isa Vera. For Reish Lakish Amar Potter. Reish Lakish is not denying that in a case where he's chayev malchus b'shogeg, he's part of paying mamon. And even though he has not incurred a chiyuv malchus before, he's only chayev malchus in the theoretical sense. Nevertheless, he's part of tashlumei mamon. And that's called beferish ripsa Torah chayvei malchus kechayvei misas. That just like chayvei misas b'shogigin up turmi tashlumin, so too chayvei malchus shogigin up turmi min tashlumin. Eichan ripsa Torah mabai asir Rasha Rasha. In the Parsha of Chayvei Misas, it says, "Lo sikhu kofer lenefesh rotzeach asher hu rasha lamuski mos yumas." And in Chayvei Malchus, it says, "V'yim ben hakos rasha v'pilu hashofet v'kol lefanov kidei rishaso b'mispar." So in both cases, we have the word rasha. Right? We have lo sikhu kofer lenefesh rotzeach asher hu rasha lamus. And Vayim ben Hakos are Russian. And based on this Gzeir Shava, Reish Lakish concludes that if someone was chayav the Ma'isa Vera, but he was a shogeg, then he's part of him tashlumei mamon that he incurred at the Shas Avera. And that's derived from a special pasuk in the Torah, which is called Ribsa Torah Chayvei Malchus Chayvei Misas. So that's going to be a Gzeira Shava of Rasha Roshka. But just like in the case of a Mezid, the Torah says, Lo sikhu kofer lenefesh otseach. Okay, this is where we're going to stop here. Russia. This is the Gzeret Shava that Abaye has between Chayve Mises and Chayve Malchus. And the same din applies to both. Okay, then, so let me wish you a great week, and
Yeah, you too.
let me know exactly when you hope to arrive.
Yeah. Okay. I'm assuming next Sunday we will not be on.